Buses? My bus structure is an absolute disaster right now. So in Lich and Battle Mage, our chief creative officer decided early on that he wanted to kind of reinforce the badass nature of being a mage. So we ended up with spells that are not quite traditional magic sounds. They're pretty beefed up. They actually use a lot of explosions and gun sounds and grenades within magic sounds. That quickly led to an issue where we have a lot of high volume things happening all at once, and we had to manage those. So by really breaking things down with the bus system in Wwise, I'm able to really easily duck and maneuver different sets of game audio based on kind of what's going on in the game at the time and what we want to poke out. Epic loot sounds, legendary loot drops, things like that we want to really overtake the player's experience. I can easily kind of nicely bring down specific buses in order to bring those forward. That was a really long way of saying I use ducking.
No, that's okay.
Okay, so one way we were able to creatively solve a problem using ducking up in the Master Mixer is in Plants vs. Zombies 2. The future world for PvZ2 incorporates a lot of new plants that have futuristic capabilities to attack these zombies as they're coming in. And a couple in particular are the laser bean and the mag grass. When they are nitroed, they shoot out a beam of light that impacts zombies and does consistent damage until the end of their attack. And in normal gameplay, as a plant attacks a zombie, it would launch its projectile, which would then be impacted on the zombie, making a sound that was appropriate for that impact. And very quickly, we came to find out that as these laser beams were hitting the zombies during the nitro, that they would constantly be sending requests to play these impact sounds, resulting in just a spamming of the impact sound that was totally inappropriate at the time. And so one thing we did is we added those nitro sounds to their own bus, and then use that bus to duck the impact sounds for the zombies when they were played. And so it's simple auto ducking, and it worked really effectively to solve a problem, which for us, we could have attacked from the code side, could have implemented a programming fix and applied a cooldown, but was just as easy for us to drop it in to the master mixer and solve that problem without engaging engineers in the discussion.
That's actually and all your content, is there kind of like a specific example of the structure you use when it comes to working with actor mixers?
Yeah, I think it depends both on what's loaded in the game. I try to have my actor mixer hierarchy reflect our sound bank hierarchy, just because that's the way Peggle works, and it's a little bit of a cleaner way for us to work on that. I also like to break it up according to the way I think of the art assets or the game assets. So character sounds would have its own actor mixer, environments would have its own actor mixer, effects may have its own. There's many, you can do it any way you want to, but for the way my brain works and for a lot of projects that I've been on, it seems to be a good way to do it.
Kind of along the same line, specific structure you use as far as like your master mix buses and the busing structure?
Oh, definitely. And for that, it depends on what I want to do with the mix, but I tend to have a bus for, let's take ambience again as an example, a bus for ambient, and then underneath that sub buses for all of the different areas of the ambient environment. So I can go through and change each of those individually or change the whole thing when we get to the top level of mixing. And so generally that's how it's organized all the way through the different categories of game elements that we have audio for.
Can you give me an example of ambient environments that are specific to Peggle?
Sure. So there's a sort of outdoor park area that's called the Peggle Institute, which is where the unicorn primarily lives. So that would be one environment, and that would be on its own bus. And then we have another one that's for Luna, who is a ghost child, and her environment is a creepy swamp slash graveyard, but very atmospheric, and so she has her own actor mixer as well. And these also refer then to, and bus, and these refer to their own sound banks as well for these different characters because they're loaded at different times. So it just keeps an organized session for the way Peggle is specifically.
Let's see. Do you guys use ducking at all?
Oh yeah, I do use ducking. I think we don't have dialogue in Peggle 2, so we don't use ducking for dialogue. Traditionally in other games that I've worked on, it's often a place where I add a little soft ducking. For Peggle, I tend to use ducking for the major gameplay elements when I want a sound to really poke through or a moment to happen. So when you hit the last peg, and before you get what's called fever, which is basically this huge celebration that happens at the end. Some ducking happens there to make that moment more dramatic, but without having there be too many sounds for your ear to listen to. It's good to pare it down whenever you can to make sure that you're being very effective and concise almost in what you're conveying to the user.
So let's talk about the busing structure for Rocksmith 2014. So we broke it out into features. So Learn a Song has its own bus away from lessons, away from mini games. Mini games actually individually have their own buses. Session mode has their own bus. And what's important about that is all the channels in there need effects that are slotted in there. So when you actually go and grab a guitar instrument in session mode, it's actually going to send that sampler instrument through a bus that's dedicated for that, which has all the effects dedicated to that instrument, including the distortion, the convolution, and everything else necessary to make it sound the way it does. That then parents up to larger buses that then put on reverb and stuff like that, all the way out to the master bus, where we do final volume boosting and a little bit of limiting so nobody blows through the ceiling. Oh, I could talk, actually, I have something way better to say about that. Delete that last thing. That was nonsense. Here's a much better way to do it. So the busing structure in Rocksmith 2014, we really took advantage of it with Tone Designer. So with Tone Designer, that's a place where you actually go in and grab amps and cabinets and pedals and mix them together however you want. Change the order, change the actual knobs on it. So you can imagine now that this is an actual nightmare for your structure. How are you going to get all of that stuff in, and how are you going to have it, how are you going to have every scenario laid out? So what we actually do is we dynamically generate instances of effects on a huge bus string. So when you actually look at player one's bus, it's like it has their basic input stuff, and then there's this very long chain of just effect, 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 and those are actually all just empty. And then in the game, when you go and choose a tone, it says like, okay, I have this file now, it's a JSON file, it's a tone, and I know that there's the following pedals in this tone, so I'm going to go grab what those pedals are, and then I'm going to instantiate them on the bus structure in order. So this was the way that we were able to actually move around stuff. So now I could put a pedal at the end of the signal chain, I could bring it back to the front, I could change an amp, I could do anything, and all you have to do is just deactivate the bus structure, then reactivate it after you've instantiated those effects. It was a really easy way to get all these different levels of mobility into our Y session. So now let's talk about how we used the ducking feature in Y. So the place where we use this the most is actually in VO. So Rocksmith 2014 has a friendly voice that actually guides you through your entire journey of learning how to play guitar. But you know, you also have your guitar volume amp the whole time. There's also music going the whole time. There's also little sound effects here and there, UI sound effects. It can get really distracting if everything is just hitting you all at once. So we actually, on all the buses are ducked by VO. And whenever VO is on, everything's ducked down 6 dB, 3 dB, according to how it actually, how loud it actually is in real life. And what it ends up doing is making a very clear, focused journey for the person. We found that people are able to actually focus on what's going on and know what's happening easier when they have that voice very clearly right out in front telling them what to do next.
Even if Outlast was an indie game, we were into like a very big session in Wise, so we had to structure busing a way that it will be more like a film mixing out of it. We spent 75 hours of mixing Outlast, even if it's a 4 or 5 hour gameplay. So the busing structure was basically divided by main character voice, and then the rest of the voices was another busing. We had all the Foley was Foley footstep was another busing. We had specific sound effects as another busing, music obviously, and we were monitoring with all the meters in Wwise, and also decoding in real time in Pro Tools through a Dolby decoder. So we were aiming. The busing situation was a very big key for us for mixing the game.
Did you guys use ducking in your busing structure?
Yes, of course we use the ducking system because we tend to really optimize and focusing on the important stuff, on specific action, you know. So we were cutting down the ambience, for example, and focusing on maybe just footsteps or breathing. The breathing was a lot of the key element of the fearness of the game. So basically just raising down intelligently sound that doesn't need to be big on first place.
Talk about the busing structure.
The busing structure was a bit of a beast. When I came on, we had anywhere from around 175 to 200 buses. That was from SR3, and that was just a result of a lot of people coming together and having different instances per mission, a lot of custom things, because I mean that was the nature of Saints Row 4. We had a lot of custom content, so a lot of custom buses. So we ended up narrowing down the core of Saints Row 4 to around 45 to 50 buses, just optimized, and that's just going in and kind of analyzing all your audio objects, making sure you know what's ducking what, and kind of just eliminating all the fluff and cruff that you wouldn't necessarily need. So that was the big nature.
Talk a little bit about ducking. How you guys use that?
Ducking, we ended up going with, speaking again specifically to Saints Row 4, we ended up using, on the onset, creating like a hierarchy of what was important for us first. What would duck what depending on the different game circumstances. So I would say our highest priority was voice, because we had a ton of voice and it had to be heard. And our second was superpowers, followed by weapons, and then enemies, and then ambience at the end. So depending on what played, you know, those would take priority based on that structure. And then we used pretty well buses, Wwise's automatic busing for the majority of the ducking that occurred there. So.